Laura, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Laura is joining us to share her story at 46. But she was also pregnant at 43. So I think we need to touch a little bit on that. But Laura, before we get started, will you share a little bit about yourself?
I'm happy to. I live in Boston. I really enjoyed my single life. I was actually a distance runner. I worked for a series of nonprofit organizations and was really enjoying myself, but really did want to start a family. My husband and I met training for the Boston Marathon. Sometimes I talk about it where I was not an athlete growing up. I never played team sports. I wasn't on track or cross country or anything. But when I was 26, I would say, that was the year that all my girlfriends got married. And I was in a different bridesmaid's dress every weekend. And the following year, I was like, I need this to be my year. Like, what am I going to do to make this coming year special and make it important to me? I'm not getting married, as far as I know. So that's not something that I can necessarily control. So, what am I going to do? And so I decided to train for a marathon. And I think that was the first time in my life that I proved to myself or showed myself how powerful it can be to like how we can set our mind to a goal and change our future. Change, we can control what's next for our lives. In this particular case, like, this is going to be my year. I can't just sit around and hope that good things happen. So what am I going to do? I just found how much power we have in deciding to go out and get something good for ourselves. And it really changed everything for my life. And then eventually running races and working for a nonprofit organization. That's how I met my husband. I think that we were both in our late 30s, mid to late 30s. And then we were 40 when we got married. We did both want to start a family. And so had planned to start trying right away. And I was 40 and I read the numbers. I suspected that it might not be easy for us. We saw a doctor just to run the basic blood tests, the fertility panel, they call it. And even before those results came back, this doctor said to me, well, I don't know what your plans are. I don't know how important this is to you, but I don't see a lot of women getting pregnant with their own eggs over 40. And
Uh,
I was like, what?
was he not even looking at your numbers? He was just looking at your
No, no, this
age?
was like literally my first appointment. They were
Uh,
running the blood work that day. So she had not looked at my
mm,
numbers. And so it was a really frustrating conversation. And you know what? I wish that I proved her wrong. But spoiler alert, that's not what happened. And she was totally right. But before we got to that point, it was just very eye-opening for me. And I did wish that I had more education when I was younger. Everyone would always say to me, oh, you're so healthy, you run marathons, and you're not going to have trouble getting pregnant. But basically what I'll call them
right.
they, it's just, I guess, talking heads in my life. But my doctor, my PCP, she never said to me, I know that you want to have a family. You should consider freezing your eggs, or you should consider options because you are almost 40. That never happened. Maybe it was fate. Who knows? But we did give it a try. We tried on our own for a little while. We did Clomid. We did a couple of cycles of IUI and nothing worked. We probably had been trying for less than a year and we went straight to IVF. Like, it's silly for us to waste time. I should mention the blood work that I had originally taken did show that my AMH numbers were very, very low.
Mm,
And for anyone who isn't familiar with that term, AMH is a hormone level that can reflect our quantity of eggs. It does not give any indication of the quality, but basically how many eggs you have in your reserve. So that number was very, very low.
Yeah.
So we now know that AMH level doesn't necessarily mean that you can get pregnant, but it does indicate how you might respond to IVF medications and those fertility treatments. And that was my case. We did 3 rounds of IVF, egg retrievals. The first round, we got 3 eggs. They all fertilized. One made it to day 5 and was sent off for PGT testing and came back with a chromosome abnormality. So we opted not to transfer that embryo. We did a second round. We got 2 eggs that time, and I think 1 fertilized but didn't make it. And then a third egg retrieval. We got 1 egg, and I don't even think it made it to. I don't remember if it fertilized. I just know that it certainly was not eligible to be an embryo. I remember driving to that egg retrieval and saying to my husband, "This is absurd. This is never going to work." And he was like, "What? We're driving to the clinic. You're about to go under anesthesia. And it's so unlike you to be negative in a situation like this." And I just said to him, "I just don't think that we're on the right path. I need to do this. I need to do this 3rd cycle. And then it's time for a new idea. It's time to think outside my eggs."
Like you needed to complete this for your mind to
Mhm.
be okay with moving on.
Exactly. And when it comes to fertility treatments, especially when they're not going well, this is different for everybody, I think.
Sure.
What you need to do to be ready to move on. A lot of women ask me, like, how do I know when it's time to give up on my eggs? How do I know, will I ever feel like I'm ready to move on to donor conception or whatever they're going to do next? And I think it is different for everybody. For me, it was that 3rd cycle to not go well.
Yeah. And for me, it was one
Yeah.
egg retrieval. And I'm like, no more of this.
A lot of women who choose donor conception will, in looking back, and of course, 2020, like hindsight's 2020, right?
Sure.
But they will say, "I wish I did it so much sooner because we wasted so much money and mental anguish." But you never want to move forward on that path without knowing that that is 100% what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Because it is a really difficult decision and you need to feel so confident that it's the right decision for you. And for me, it was that 3rd cycle that allowed me to say, okay, at that point, I had been researching donor conception and donor eggs. And while I think in the beginning, I never would have, obviously, I did not imagine that that was going to be the choice for us. Once I started thinking about it and realizing how it increased our opportunity, our chance of getting pregnant so significantly, I realized for me, my truth was that I want to get pregnant. I want to have a baby. And while it would, of course, it would be nice to be passing on my DNA and my genetics, I'm not feeling like that's going to work. And I feel like this path of donor eggs is going to work. So I want to do this and I want to do it now. I know a lot of women who really need to feel like they exhaust all the possibilities because they want to use their own genetics. And I appreciate that. For me, that just was not the priority. The priority was that I wanted a baby. I wanted to hold a baby in my arms. I was ready now.
Yeah, me
And
too.
so, And so we did decide on going the donor egg route. And then it went from bad news, bad news, bad news to all good news. From the second that my agency said, your donor said, yes, she's open to the cycle, it was like, yes, she's available. Yes, she passed the first screening. Yes, she's on board with all of the logistical things that we had to do. It
Mhm.
was yes, yes, yes. And then her cycle was very successful. She responded incredibly well to the stimulation meds. And I think at egg retrieval, and I would have to go back into my notes, but I'm pretty confident it was something like 30 eggs.
Oh my gosh. One question. So you decided on a fresh cycle instead of doing frozen
Mhm.
eggs.
That's a really good question.
And how did you decide on your donor? Like what was important
Mhm.
to you?
So we did decide on we wanted to do a fresh cycle because we were ideally going to also eventually do a sibling cycle as well. We're hoping for two children.
Mhm.
And so that was the plan. And we knew that the odds of being able to have at least two children were much better with a fresh cycle.
Mhm.
And so we decided to go that route. I had some very specific qualities that I was looking for. I wanted someone who resembled me. And I think that that's very common for those
Sure.
of us who go the donor conception route. The idea that if I chose a donor who resembled me, then my children could potentially resemble me.
Mhm.
And that was important to me. I have blue eyes. My husband has brown eyes, which is obviously going to be the dominant gene, but I needed to have that chance. I felt very strongly that if my children had blue eyes, I guess this was important to me, what people thought. And it was so important to me that she had blue eyes that when I was looking through these options of women that were available to be my donor at different agencies, I would just filter out everything but blue eyes. So it could have been my doppelganger. And if you didn't have blue eyes, I was just not interested. I kind of ran the show. Again, I get the feeling that's pretty common, especially when you're looking for an egg donor. So I was like the project manager in this adventure. And I chose four potential women. They all had blue eyes, fair skinned, resembled me in one way or another. They similar heights and builds. But I was also looking for women who had similar talents to me and my husband. My husband was an athlete and his sports were soccer and swimming. And so I ended up choosing a donor who also excelled in those sports. I did want someone who was talented academically and who I knew took that seriously. And then I wanted to read about them and who did I connect to? Because a lot of the donors for these agencies are brilliant women. A lot of them are academically very talented and they have all these accolades and they are obviously have incredibly high quality genetics and DNA, things that are in their DNA, like being an athlete and being highly intelligent, things like that. But I wanted to read about them. Like, who are they? What's important to them? What's their relationship with their family? Why are they choosing to do this? And so that was also really important to me.
Mhm.
And I ultimately, like I said, I chose 4 or 5 women and I kind of presented them to my husband. Like, here's who I think, after looking at literally hundreds of women, it was kind of nostalgic to the years that I was on dating apps where I was just like scrolling through
Yep.
who do I connect with? Who do I see as somebody I would want to spend time with? It's a very similar process
Yeah.
with a very different outcome. And, but, when like I said, I offered, these are the women that I think would be the best choice for us. And not surprisingly, he chose the same woman that was my first choice. And
Nice.
so it was really thrilling when she accepted. She is an anonymous donor, so we have never met her. I don't know her name.
Do people normally meet their donor?
I think they do now. I think
Oh.
it's not unusual. So this was 2017 that we did our donor cycle.
Okay.
And I get the feeling that it's more common now for there to be at least some communication. But I did not necessarily say, I want my donor to be anonymous. It was more that the donor I chose was an anonymous donor.
Right.
And we have communicated through our agency where I've been able to ask some questions and share some things with her. And I know that she has welcomed that communication. And so she knows that I have 2 children, and I've been able to thank her via these electronic communications. And down the line, when my children are older, if they were to become more curious, then they will have access the same way that I have to reaching out to her. That being said, when my children are older and become more curious, the technology, the way that it is now with DNA, if they want to find her, then it certainly won't be difficult for them. So
Yeah. Anonymous really isn't anonymous anymore.
there's no such thing as anonymous.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm sure y'all got a lot of embryos. Did you get them tested?
We did not. We chose not to. It was a recommendation from our clinic.
Hmm.
I think, it was certainly an option for us if we wanted to, but like I said, I wanted to have a baby. I was so ready to be pregnant. So I was excited to do a fresh cycle. So she had her egg retrieval, and then my embryo transfer was 5 days later.
Wow.
And yeah. And now looking back, this is kind of a complex issue for me because I sometimes wonder, like, should we have tested them? And the reason is we did in between my first pregnancy and my daughter was born several years later. We did have a few losses. I had 2 pregnancy losses from donor cycle embryos, as well as we lost an embryo that didn't survive the thaw. And we did an embryo transfer that just didn't take, I just didn't become pregnant.
Hmm.
And I'm going to go with just kind of bizarre twist of fate when my son was the result of that fresh embryo transfer. So she had her egg retrieval, I did my embryo transfer, I was pregnant, and it was incredible. Like, it was the first time I'd ever been pregnant. Like I said, it was just all good news, good news, good news. And of course I was pregnant because of course it worked out. I knew this was going to how we got our family. It was incredible. And he is amazing. And then when he was 9 months old, I realized I was pregnant. I had become pregnant naturally. Unfortunately, I realized I was pregnant because I was experiencing a miscarriage.
Ugh.
I had stopped breastfeeding probably 2 or 3 months prior to that. So my cycle wasn't normal yet. And so when I missed a period, I didn't think anything of it. And then 4 weeks later, I started spotting of it. And I remember thinking, like, okay, here it is. Like, we're slowly getting back on track. And then later that morning, it became clear that this was not my period. And I went to the doctor, and actually I took a pregnancy test. My husband said I was panicking, and my husband said, could you have been pregnant? Are you miscarrying? And he said, I'm going to go to CVS and get us a pregnancy test so we can know. And I was like, oh, honey, go under the kitchen, go into the bathroom cabinet. Like, there's pregnancy
There's
tests.
lots.
Plenty of pregnancy tests in the house. And sure enough, I was pregnant. That was
Wow.
very confusing and complex emotionally for me. Like, I was in disbelief that this was happening. And I did feel some guilt that, life was trying to grow inside me and I didn't know it. It was not like I was doing anything that would have caused the miscarriage. And I wasn't drinking or, using drugs or anything that
Sure.
would have harmed the baby. But I also, part of me is like, would this have been different if I knew? If I was kind
Yeah.
of nurturing that even emotionally? And the answer to that question is likely no.
Yeah.
This was not. I was in my close to my mid 40s and with low egg quantity and like in lower egg quality at this point. And so likely like, no, this was not going to be a viable pregnancy.
Yeah.
But it was the first time I'd experienced pregnancy loss.
Yeah.
And so it was super complicated. I don't think I gave myself an opportunity to really heal from that experience properly. I just kind of took it as a sign that I wanted to get pregnant.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. On this podcast, for me, it's really important that we share our losses also.
Mm.
So thank you. I know how hard it is.
Yes. And I think that it's pregnancy loss is so complicated.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to understand if you haven't experienced it yourself.
Mhm.
Not that you can't be sympathetic to somebody, appropriately sympathetic to somebody who has lost a pregnancy, even if you haven't yourself. They're so difficult to express that I think it makes it extra hard to heal from
Yeah.
and, and heal properly. So,
Yeah.
and I'm still learning that. We worked with our doctor to do another embryo transfer. So now we were going to do our first frozen embryo transfer.
Uh-huh.
And this was really exciting because it was different this time around. I knew what I was doing. I was so confident. Like, this is so exciting. I know how to get pregnant now, and I know how to do an embryo transfer. And like, I'm going to do all of my tricks for my uterine lining, and I'm going to acupuncture. And like, I can't wait to be pregnant again. And so we did another embryo transfer. And sure enough, I was pregnant again. And I was like, oh, buddy, I can't believe we're so lucky that I remember thinking that we were so lucky that once again, it's more good news. We went for our first ultrasound and they were concerned because they could not find a consistent heart rate. It was
Uh,
toggling between two, and the numbers were low as well.
uh,
And so they said, well, don't panic. It was probably about 7 weeks. So they said, don't panic. Let's come back, have you come back in a week and we'll see. But it's not that unusual for something like this, but we do want to check you out again. And so I went back a week later and they said to me, well, we have an answer why we couldn't get a consistent heart rate. There are two heartbeats. So the
Whoa.
embryo had split and I was carrying identical twins. So that was another super complicated situation where that was not in the plans.
Uh,
And now I'm in my mid 40s and I'm going to carry identical twins. And when these twins are born, my son won't even be 2 yet. So I'm going to have 3 children under 2. And my husband was, given the news, he was visibly, I'm going to use the term angry. He was just like, this was
wow.
not what I'm not prepared for this.
It wasn't the plan.
It was not the plan. And so they wanted us to come back a week later. And we spent that week just letting it settle and trying to come to terms with the idea that we were going to be a family of 5 and what twins was going to look like and identical twins. Like we were either going to have 3 boys or, a little boy and 2 identical twin girls. And then we went back for another ultrasound and there was no heartbeats, no growth.
Ugh.
And so that was a moment in my journey, the moment where the sonographer turned to me at the ultrasound and said, I'm sorry, I don't see a viable pregnancy, is a moment that has been stamped tattooed on my heart, on my emotional gut
Yeah.
that I
You'll
don't
never forget it.
know. It's so, it was really, even though I knew that like something wasn't quite right with this pregnancy, it was just really challenging to experience that.
Take your time.
Yet I remember getting that news and being in the doctor's office and trying to, trying to wipe my tears and have, and compose myself and think to myself, well, we have another chance. We have more embryos. So we are so lucky. We are so lucky. I said, we have more embryos. There are people that sit in this room and get that news, and this is their last chance. But we are going to be okay, and we're going to have another baby. And that's all I thought about, not necessarily allowing myself to process this incredibly abrupt information, this roller coaster that we were on that came to a screeching halt. And instead of letting myself grieve, I thought the answer was pushing forward.
Uh-huh.
And that eventually caught up with me, where I had to, when I was pregnant again, learn to address that grief.
Mhm.
And in order to prepare for the birth of my daughter. And that was really, really difficult. After that loss, we learned that loss, and this goes back to your question about testing the embryos. I opted to have a DNC, and that tissue was tested, and that embryo tested positive for a chromosome abnormality. So I think back to, should I have tested the embryos? It would have saved me that grief, but would it have changed the outcome of the future? It's
Yeah.
like that whole, like, a butterfly flaps its wings in another country and it changes the weather or something like that. And so it's hard to say, I wish I did this differently, knowing about what the outcome turned out to be. We experienced yet another loss we had embryo loss. One embryo didn't survive the thaw. We had another embryo transfer where it just turned out to be a negative pregnancy test. Another one was what they call a biochemical pregnancy, where it was just very early on. I got a positive pregnancy test, but the hormone levels were very low, and physically recovering from that was really difficult. And I sometimes wonder if that was my body telling me, you're not ready. So we're going to force you to pause.
Uh-huh.
We just had a really difficult time bringing the HCG levels down so we could try again. And so that was difficult. Like I said, physically, my body, potentially my body just wasn't ready
Uh-huh.
to try again. And so it prevented me from trying again.
Now, how long were you waiting in between transfers?
That would have been November of 2019. And then, right? Yes. And then the next was probably early in 2020. And then it was COVID. And so things did start to spread out a little bit more. And I had a transfer in July of 2020. And so now it's several months.
Uh-huh.
July of 2020 is where we struggled to get that was the biochemical, where we couldn't get my HCG levels down.
Uh-huh.
And so that took some time.
Did they give any reason why it wouldn't go down?
They called it a pregnancy of unknown location,
What?
which I know, which is kind of one of the ickiest diagnoses I've ever received. So
Uh-huh.
it wasn't ectopic. We were able to confirm that it wasn't ectopic. So what they suggested it could have been is that the embryo just didn't stick, but so if you know, and this is a little bit clinical and scientific, and I am neither a clinician or a scientist or a medical professional, but an embryo, there's like two layers of the embryo. The inside layer of the embryo is what's going to become the baby. The outside layer of the embryo is what is going to become the placenta. So they suggested what might have happened was that part of the placenta implanted or kind of stuck, we'll say, to the uterine lining, but the rest of the embryo did not. And if the placenta is where the hormone levels are. And so if the piece of the placenta is stuck, the hormone levels are going to continue to rise and fall.
Uh,
And even though you're not pregnant.
okay.
So they called it a pregnancy of unknown location. And actually, I met someone not that long ago who explained that they also had a pregnancy of unknown location. I think it's kind of like we don't know what's happening. So this is what we're going to call it. But it was scary, like, because we had to confirm that it was not an ectopic. And I was like, how could it be an ectopic pregnancy? And they put the embryo in my uterus.
Yeah.
How can they not know where it is? But at the end of the day, that forced me to, like I said, it forced me to take some time. And so it was the fall before we were ready to try it again. And I'm going to tell this little anecdote that's a little bit more, I'm going to use the term woo-woo than I usually am. I like science, I like facts, but I also did experience this. That transfer that resulted in the biochemical pregnancy, I had looked at my remaining embryos and saw that there was an embryo that was graded a 4AB. And I assumed that that was the next one they were going to put in. And so I was just like, that looks like, on paper, that looks like the next best graded embryo. But when I went in for that, they told me that they were actually putting in the 4BA. And I was like, that's weird. I wonder why. And I was obsessing over it, Jamie. I was just like, why would they put in the 4BA? So I did a little bit of research and I asked an embryologist on Instagram, and she was like, oh, I'll tell you, because like I said before, so the inside of the embryo is what's going to be the baby, the outside is what's going to be the placenta.
Uh-huh.
And that's what the grades are. So the A
Oh.
is the maybe the A is the one is the placenta, one is what's going to be the embryo.
Uh-huh.
And so they decided that they wanted the placenta grading to be the A and the embryo grading to be the B. And at the end of the day, they said it doesn't really, like, a 4BA is just as good as a 4AB.
Yeah.
And another thing to note about embryo grading is that it is like kind of judging a book by its cover, right? Like it's like deciding what you think about someone based on what they look like.
Uh-huh.
So it is not, there's only so much that they can see when they're grading embryos. And so it does not tell the full story. Obviously, they put in this 4BA, and I was like, that's weird. That's not the embryo that I thought. And it resulted in a biochemical pregnancy. So I did have to wait some time. And then in the fall of that year, so now this is the fall of 2020, I did another transfer. And I was,
How many losses are you up to now?
okay, well, 3 pregnancy losses, the natural pregnancy, the twins that I lost at 10 weeks,
Uh-huh.
and the biochemical.
Okay.
I also lost an embryo that didn't survive the thaw, an embryo when they did an embryo transfer and it just didn't take.
Uh-huh.
So,
So that we're up to 5.
yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah. So in the fall, they're going to do another frozen embryo transfer. Of
Right.
course, this is really difficult for me to prepare for, right? Because I've had all these losses and I'm scared. I'm ready to be pregnant again. And I'm ready to not be sad anymore. And so I'm preparing for this embryo transfer, and I go to my acupuncturist and I say to her, I really think they're going to put in the 4AB this time. And I really think that that's my baby. And I said, but I'm nervous to think that way. Like, first of all, like, there is this belief in spirit babies that the baby is out there. You just have to wait for the right vessel, the right embryo for the baby to come to you. But that embryo is the one that I really thought that they were going to put in last time. And I know that they're going to put it in. I'm certain they're going to put it in this time. And I really think that that's my baby, but I'm afraid to get attached to an embryo because what if this one doesn't work out too?
Yeah.
And she said to me, is it going to be less devastating? are more devastating depending on how connected you feel to the embryo.
Yep.
And I said, I don't know. And she said, I think that you allow yourself to feel however you feel. So as I assumed they did in this, so now we're in the fall, the October of 2020, and they did put in that for AB, and I became pregnant, and it was a perfect pregnancy. And my daughter is 2.5 now.
Oh, I
And
love that.
she is that embryo that I knew it.
Take us through like your 2 week wait and what was it like did you test and what was it like getting the call?
Well, for any of my followers or clients who are listening, they know that I never feel comfortable saying, don't test. It's not okay to test because I'm a tester. I test 7 days out. So 7 days past my transfer and no sooner. And so with this particular transfer, after all of those losses, I was very nervous to test. We had planned a vacation that we had put off because of COVID. And so it was a vacation. We were celebrating our anniversary, which was in May, but in October. And so we were traveling in Tennessee and Eastern Tennessee and the Smoky Mountains, and at a really beautiful resort that had a incredible restaurant and a very impressive wine list. And I was very excited about that. But I had had an embryo transfer. And so I normally would never, ever drink. I was just not comfortable. I'm not comfortable drinking alcohol after an embryo transfer. I act like I'm pregnant. And it was a week after my transfer. And then, so of course I brought pregnancy tests with me, just the simple strips. And so the morning after we got there, early in the morning, I got up in our hotel room and tested, and I put it in a drawer and like brushed my teeth or something that was going to take a few minutes, and then slowly opened the drawer, and then clear as day was that second line. And I thought to myself, okay, I am pregnant right now. So, like, what does that mean? And I was happy. I was really happy. I remember like having that, like taking that deep breath, like, oh, I really, really felt good about this one. And so I was super excited. But what is this going to look like tomorrow? And this doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have a baby. The big difference between pregnancy before loss or before even fertility struggles and after you've gone through fertility struggles or loss is that when you take a pregnancy test in the beautiful innocence of not experiencing challenges, you take a pregnancy test, and if it's positive, I'm going to have a baby. And then after loss or challenges, or when things are difficult in terms of fertility, when you take a pregnancy test, it means you're pregnant right now, but you don't know what's going to happen. And you don't know if this means you're going to hold a baby or if it means you're going to experience heartbreak. And so that's where I was, where I didn't know what this meant. I knew that I was pregnant right now, and I felt good about it. I really did. I really felt like this was going to be the baby that I was meant to hold. But I also knew that it didn't necessarily matter how I felt. And so I probably tested every day for 10 days, and I kept all the tests. I was one of those people that kept all the tests. I would write the date on the back of the strip so I could compare, because it was so satisfying to compare and to watch it get darker and darker and darker. And when we came back, I had the beta in my clinic, and it was a strong first beta. And
You remember what the number was?
So the first beta was 577 and the second was 1261.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That is so high.
It's so high. It was really, yeah, it was a good one.
Did it give you the confidence that this one was going to stick?
No, because my second pregnancy, the twins I lost at 10 weeks,
Uh-huh.
was those betas were also very high.
Mm.
It was also twins, but so that never really meant anything to me except I am pregnant right now.
Uh-huh.
I learned some valuable lessons there. The 2 week wait was hard. It helped that I was on vacation. I had never been on vacation for a 2 week wait before. And it really did help. We went to Dollywood while we were in
Oh,
Tennessee.
fun.
So fun. But my husband had to go on all the roller coasters by himself. And I was in line, like just like kind of like waiting in line, like for him. I was like taking pictures, and it was easy for me to let him go on all the roller coasters and all the rides by himself because I was pregnant. And
Uh-huh.
somebody did say to me, I was kind of giggling because he was getting on by himself. And again, this is COVID. So when I say he was on there by himself, it was like they were
He really
cramming people
was.
onto the roller coasters. Like the flume he went on all by himself. I have a picture and I'm like giggling in the video that I think I took. Like, he's alone. It's flume. And somebody in line had said to me, do you not like roller coasters? And I said, I love roller coasters. I'm pregnant. And they said, oh my gosh, like how far along are you? And I'm like, oh, like a week,
Yeah.
But it was like I could share it because it was a complete stranger. And
Yep.
so, but it was like kind of cute that I was able to say I like literally just found out like yesterday. And so we planned this trip but I will always remember, I mean, it was a wonderful trip, and I will always associate that trip with realizing that finding out that we were pregnant with my daughter. And that was so special. That being said, we came home and then it was, doctor's appointments. And when get pregnant via IVF, you have all of this attention in the beginning where you have betas every couple of days or so, and then you have a super early ultrasound. And if you want to request more ultrasounds, like especially if you've had losses, you can request more ultrasounds, and you have all this attention. And so that was really exciting, and I felt really good about everything. But then there's a lull in between graduating from your fertility clinic and seeing your OB for the first time. And that was really difficult.
Uh-huh.
And to the point where I think I asked for another ultrasound at my fertility clinic. And given my history, they were totally fine with it. But that was really difficult. And I did find myself getting super anxious. I'm not a particularly anxious person, but I would get worried. I would get scared. I would find that I was incredibly emotional. I mean, I was also pregnant and hormonal, but my emotions weren't like crying over something cute and like a Hallmark commercial or a movie or something. It was just spontaneous thinking, oh my gosh, what if it doesn't work? What if she doesn't stay? At that point, I didn't know she was a she yet, but I remember standing at my kitchen counter and getting emotional out of nowhere. And then sharing that with my husband. Like, I'm feeling really anxious, like unusually anxious for myself. And he said, why? Like, we know you're pregnant, And he even at one point he said, I think I mentioned like with every twinge, with every like anything that I feel, I'm worried.
Yep.
And he said, the term, the phrase, if you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras. And I had to explain to him, but loss is horses, and a successful pregnancy is my zebra. And so I don't know how to make that switch. I didn't like feeling anxious. I decided like this isn't fair. It's not fair to me. I've worked way too hard to get pregnant with this baby. And it's not fair that I can't enjoy it. And so it also wasn't fair to my family. It's not fair to my husband, who's walking on eggshells to make sure he doesn't make me cry. And my son, who was so young, only 2 at the time. It wasn't fair to them if I wasn't myself and I wasn't joyful. It wasn't fair to this baby that I was growing. Like, I want to remember this time as being joyful and exciting. And instead, I'm just worried all the time. And so, like, what can I do? And so I was, it was important to me to kind of take charge of that and at least make an effort.
Uh-huh.
I worked
Had,
with my doctor's office,
uh-huh.
who set me up with a counselor on staff who offered some tools and just encouraged me to take advantage of their services at any time. Anytime that I was really feeling like I was having a hard time and I couldn't manage, then to call them and just to have someone to talk to. They also encouraged me to, if I was feeling particularly anxious about this pregnancy, to call and make an appointment, and they could do a heartbeat check at any time. And just that invitation made me feel better. I had an answer if I was having a really hard time or if I was scared for some reason. I could go in and just hear the heartbeat. And that helped me a lot too. Some of the other things that I did, I started doing yoga. I think it was probably that spring I committed to doing yoga, even if it was just like 1 or 2 sun salutations. I did prenatal yoga pretty much every day through this pregnancy, even if it was just a few minutes, just to kind of connect with my body and feel strong and feel like I was nourishing my body, feel like I was nourishing this baby and feel good. And that helped a lot more than I had would have ever predicted that it was going to help, just to, just to give me that mentally feel like I was taking good care of myself. And then I would find poses where I could feel the baby move. There was like a certain things that I would do that would encourage her to move around.
Uh-huh.
And that meant everything to me. So if like I was having a hard time, obviously I was a little bit further on at this point if she was moving, but there were certain things that I could do where I could feel her move. And so I would just do them, feel her shift and be like, all right, she's doing good. So, but at the same time, I really did have to take some time and make sure that I acknowledge that the reason I'm feeling this way is because I'm grieving the pregnancies that I lost. That was really hard for me. We found out that she was a girl, I want to say in December, and I bought a Christmas ornament that was a rainbow. And I decided that it was in celebration of her, but also to honor the babies that we lost. And when I unwrap that Christmas ornament each year, I have to give myself a moment to, you know, and I think there was a time where I was like, oh, this makes me cry. I shouldn't, I don't want to put an ornament on my tree that makes me cry. But at the same time, like that those tears is my way of grieving and acknowledging that loss. And I think that that is just as important as the steps that we take to move forward and the steps that we take to feel good.
Yeah.
And so I think just having those tools for myself to feel in control and to feel like I'm taking good care of myself, taking care of the baby that I was carrying, taking care of my family, all contributed to navigating that complicated process.
Yeah. And how was it? Tell us the story when you found out that you were having a girl.
We like to travel to a little island off of Massachusetts called Nantucket.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and if I'm going with my family, then we have to take our car because I know kids need all this stuff. And so we were going out there, and it must have been like my son must have not been in school, or maybe it was COVID because my son wasn't in nursery school, but we were going to go out for a week. And so we took the car out there, And I had had that early testing done. So basically, they were testing when I was early in my pregnancy, they did a blood test. And with that blood test, they could determine if there were any abnormalities that we should know about with the baby that I was carrying, as well as learn the sex of the baby. And so we elected to have this testing done and to learn the sex of the baby. There had been so many surprises, good and bad, leading up to this. I wanted to know more about the baby that I was carrying. So we decided to learn the sex of the baby. So we were on the car ferry to get from Cape Cod to Nantucket. And the email came through that, and it came through early. I didn't think that I was going to get it that early, but with the results from both the medical testing and the sex of the baby. And my husband and son were using the bathroom. My husband had taken the baby up to probably change his diaper or something. And I remember panicking because if they don't get back in time, we're going to be out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not going to be able to open up the email. And so I opened up the email that told us if there's any abnormalities that we should know about. And it was thrilling to learn that that the baby was healthy and no concerns for that. But I felt like I had to wait in terms of learning the sex of the baby until they got back. And so when they got back, I yelled, get in, get in, get in, get in, get in. We have to open this email. And my husband was certain we were having another boy. He had no doubt in his mind that there was going to be another boy. And so they got into the car and I opened it up and it said, congratulations, you're having a girl. And I remember going, oh, and looking at my husband like, what is he going to say? And he said, I don't believe it. And I immediately thought, this is the best news. This is such wonderful news. And while I kind of felt like, I hope he's not disappointed, I also was, I don't think that I had thought about if I wanted a boy or a girl. I was just excited to be pregnant. And if it was a boy, that would be so fun to be raising two boys. And if it was a girl, then that's one of each, and that's amazing. But I realized like it's going to be so much easier for her to be her own person and not, my son is he's only 5.5, but he's very coordinated. He's athletic. And, he was riding a two-wheel bike when he was like 3. And so
Oh my gosh.
I was, if we had another boy, I was like, are we going to compare or assume that he's going to be just as coordinated as Duke, or is he going to be, but the little girl, it's going to be easier for her to be her own person. And so I was thrilled. And immediately I was just like, let's do all the shopping. And so,
Yes.
and this was, like I said, another milestone in feeling confident in this pregnancy and learning more about who she is. Now we know like this first big piece of information about her, that she's a little girl. And so it did increase my confidence. It did make me feel like I can potentially start sharing with more people that I was pregnant. I was a little bit nervous to share because we had started sharing that we were pregnant with the twins, especially when we found out that they were twins, to, just like, gosh, this is something incredible that's happening to us. And then we had to then go back and share that we had lost the pregnancy, and that was really difficult. And it used to be kind of like the old school rule that you don't share that you're pregnant until you're 12 weeks. But I've always been a fan of, sharing as soon as you're comfortable, because it's exciting. And regardless of, even if it does turn out to be having to also share bad news, it's still part of your life.
Yeah.
But I did want that confidence before I started talking about it more publicly. And so I felt like I had it at that point. And so it was just so exciting.
I hesitated to
Yeah.
find out the sex. Well, I mean, we haven't found out the sex, but I didn't want to.
Mhm.
And I think, like you, I think finding out the sex will give me more confidence.
Yeah. I'm just in that particular way. I'm just not a patient person. Like I needed to know, like I want to know everything that I could about these people. And
Yeah, these people
I
that you're
like to,
growing.
exactly, exactly. And I like to prepare.
Uh-huh.
So I like to be prepared. And that was kind of my, argument of people said, no, you should wait and find out. And I was like, wait, what am I waiting for? Like, it's still going to be a surprise. It's just a surprise at either, like
Yep.
at 9, 10 weeks or a surprise at 40 weeks. And so, but it was really important to me. And I found it to be helpful in terms of me, becoming more confident and being able to connect on a deeper level to the baby that I was carrying.
What about products? Was there anything that helped you when you were pregnant?
I had back trouble with both my pregnancies. I carried way out in front, so my center of gravity was way off. And so that was really what I had to physically, that's what I really struggled with,
Uh-huh.
was back pain. And, it's kind of like, I'm excited that I have back pain because that means I'm pregnant, but gosh, I'm uncomfortable.
Uh-huh.
And so I had to find ways to make that work. And so it was like buying, like, I had like an extra seat that I sat on in my chair. And I always had something behind my back. I always had like pillows or things behind my back.
Hmm.
I never used like pregnancy pillows or creams or lotions or anything like that. It just wasn't really, and I even felt like my skin was very clear when I was pregnant, something about the hormones. And so I feel like I even kind of slacked on my regular skincare because I felt like that I could. So it was more just making myself comfortable. And the times that I was really uncomfortable, what could I
Hmm.
do? And so the pillow, I had pillows everywhere. I do remember that.
Uh-huh.
Like just like had to pile them behind my back.
When did your back pain start?
20 weeks, both
Oh,
pregnancies.
you didn't hesitate.
No, I remember it like it was a light switch. A light switch went on, went off, like went from being like, oh, this is fun to like, oh gosh. Like, and then when I had back pain with my son, my older, from 20 weeks until the moment I guess until I got the epidural. And I ended up having back labor, which is
Ooh.
really uncomfortable and confusing because it doesn't feel like what they say that it's going to feel like. And so I was
Uh-huh.
in labor and I didn't know, like I was certain that this didn't feel like what it felt like earlier in my pregnancy. So I felt like I was in labor
Uh-huh.
and I was having contractions, but it didn't feel like what they said that it was going to feel like. So I just walked around the house crying,
Oh,
waiting for an opportunity to go to the hospital.
jeez.
And then when I got to the hospital, I was crying.
Oh
I was so uncomfortable. I remember the nurse saying, well, did you try taking Tylenol? I was
my
like,
gosh.
Tylenol.
Get out of here.
And then my doctor put her hands on my belly and she was like, well, Laura, you're in labor. So yeah, you're uncomfortable. And my water broke during the exam. And so I was able to be admitted. But that was on let's say, I went into labor, the back labor with my son on my due date on August 20th. And the next day, so that was a Monday, the next day was my doctor's appointment, and where they told me that, yeah, you're totally in labor. And they admitted me into the hospital because my water broke, and he was not born until the following evening.
Oh,
So
a long one.
it was, and it was fine. They were very patient with me, and they were just, we don't want to have to do a C-section if we don't have to. But when there was no progress after 2 days, they decided to go in and get him. So I did end up
Oh.
electing to have a C-section with him. And then in preparing for my daughter's birth, I had said, I don't necessarily want to sign up for a C-section just because I had one before. So, like, what are my options? Like, taking into considering the fact that I am 46 and I had, back then I had a C-section before, and like, what are the pros and cons? Like, I just want to make sure that I understand all my options. So I remember my doctor, and I should mention that when my son was born, we saw my doctor on that Tuesday, and she said, well, I won't be in the hospital until Wednesday night. So I'll come and see you then, but you'll obviously have the baby way before then. Well, my OB is the one who delivered my son because it took him that long. And that is very unusual. He was born at a big hospital in Boston. And so it's very unusual for your OB to actually deliver your baby. And so it was really special that she got to deliver him. And then when we were talking, I was pregnant with my daughter, I said, I don't necessarily want to say, like, obviously we're doing a C-section. Like, let's just weigh the options. Like, I feel like, you know, medicine has come a long way and we don't have to assume I'm going to have another C-section. And so she took out this calculator. It was basically like this algorithm to give you the odds of whether you could have a successful vaginal birth after a C-section. And it was just like, why did you have a C-section? And it was actually his positioning. And so that was in my favor. And like any complications, and I didn't really have any complications. And how did you respond to the epidural and things like that? And so everything was like looking good, looking good. And then they had to put in my age, which was going to be 46. And then it was like, woo, like the pendulum swung. And it was something like there was I want to say like a 51% chance of a successful VBAC. And so I was like, you know what? Let's not get cute. Let's decide that let's schedule the C-section, a repeat C-section. And if she decides that she's going to come early, we'll give it a shot. And every time I went in for an ultrasound, she was growing and growing and growing and growing. And I panicked and I was like, change the note, change the note. Like, I do not want to try for a vaginal birth for this baby. And she did not come on her own. We went through with the second C-section, which was scheduled with my OB. So she delivered both of my children. And she turned out to be over 9 pounds. She was 9.9 pounds.
Ooh.
And so I think I made the right decision there.
Back to your pregnancy. How did you eat and exercise during your pregnancy?
Well, as I had mentioned, I decided I did yoga almost every day. And
Right.
so I mentioned earlier in our discussion that I was a runner. I don't like to run when I'm pregnant. I
Okay.
support running during pregnancy if it feels good, but for me, it didn't feel good. And so I did a lot of walking with both my pregnancies. That was my exercise, and it made me feel good. It made me feel strong. So between that and yoga, and then I did some like bar workouts, and I found, gosh, there are so many great resources online for prenatal workouts, Resort. And so I really did make it a priority, especially with my second pregnancy, because I was experiencing so much anxiety, and it give me a sense of control. And eating with both of my pregnancies, I did not have a huge appetite. I never got sick, but it was just, I think if I craved anything, it was like bread. Like I wanted like simple food.
Uh-huh.
And I'm very lucky. My husband is a home chef. He's not a professional chef, but he's very comfortable in the kitchen, and he likes to cook. And so he knew what I was, what the things that I craved and the things that I wanted to eat, and he would cater to that. And so
Mhm. How
that was
nice.
great. It
Yeah.
was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's still nice. He still cooks for me. I was able to eat fine, but exercise was a significant part of my pregnancy and my preparation
Yeah.
towards giving birth, because it did give me a sense of control. And I liked feeling strong. I think that I was probably in like better like strength shape pregnant with my daughter than I have been since. And I think it allowed me to bounce back after a C-section in a way that helped a lot in
Yeah.
terms of recovering from
Yeah.
that experience.
How can you compare the two pregnancies at 43 and 46?
The biggest difference was the anxiety after loss,
Yeah.
where when I was pregnant with my son, I was just so excited all the time. It was just joy, 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 joy. And I mean, mostly,
Right.
but, and I will mention that with my son, we had a scare. In the anatomy scan, which is an ultrasound that they do mid-pregnancy, where they measure all of the vital organs just to make sure that there's no concerns and no anatomy concerns that they need to be aware of. So this is a standard ultrasound appointment for most pregnancies, but they discovered in that appointment that he only had one functioning kidney. And so the right kidney looked great and the left kidney was just not developing. And so this is not completely unusual. It's not totally uncommon, but given my IVF journey, they treated it like it could be a really big deal. And so that was really scary for me. I opted to do an amnio test to confirm that there was no other chromosome abnormalities that we didn't catch with the blood test earlier in the pregnancy. That came out to be negative so it turned out he was fine. We also were advised to do a fetal echocardiogram. We were advised to do the fetal echocardiogram just to confirm that there was no heart issues. And so that was really scary. And I remember crying, getting this information and thinking, after all of that, how is this possible? And it was a reminder that it's not a case of paying your dues, you know?
Yeah.
You can go through all of the things and all of this incredible fertility IVF journey and still have setbacks. He turned out to be fine, and he was born with only one functioning kidney, but it turned out to be just fine. But that was scary. Beyond that, though, it was just really exciting. We were having a baby. Where with my daughter, there was that anxiety and that stress of, gosh, I don't want to lose this one. I can't lose another one. And so that was just, it took a little bit more work to navigate that and control that and to feel like to feel confident in this pregnancy and to experience the joy, which I think is really important. And like I said earlier, I felt I deserve to feel joy with this pregnancy, and I
Sure.
don't want my past experience to steal that from me. And so, what
Yeah.
can I do? And I was really proud of myself for taking to advocate for myself in that way and saying, like, I'm going to take control of this process. I'm going to do everything that I can to feel strong and to feel confident, to feel good, and control what I can control, which is very little when you're pregnant.
So going to the C-section, how far along were you when you had your scheduled C-section?
I was probably days shy of 40 weeks. So
Okay.
I carried full term.
Will you walk us through the C-section? What was important
Um,
to you? How did it go?
the C-section went fine. It was very different. So when I had a first C-section with my son, it was after literal days of labor. And so that was relief. When I got the epidural, it was relief from the pain. And I was so excited that I was finally going to hold him. It was much more joyful. With my daughter, it was very different. The planned C-section, you get an epidural even though you're not in pain yet. And so the epidural hurt. And the whole thing just felt a little bit different. And it was kind of scary. Like I just felt very aware of everything that was going on. Labor is really difficult, even if it's a C-section. And I did become ill during both of my
Uh-oh.
deliveries. Yeah, which is not unusual. It happens to a lot of people. And But that was really hard. And I did, following the birth of my daughter, I had a uterine hemorrhage, which was really scary.
Oh,
So I was out of the OR in the recovery room, and they were like kind of checking up on me and noticed the bleed. And then all of a sudden there was like 15 doctors in my room. They took my daughter and they gave her to my husband. And that was really scary. There was a lot of yelling because they had to make sure that I was safe.
yeah.
And so basically, when you have a uterine hemorrhage, there's like it's like a triage of like, okay, well, we're going to first try this to stop the bleeding. And I don't know enough about this to give the solutions to all of this. I just know that there was kind of three steps. And one was, the first non-invasive solution to stop the bleeding. If that doesn't work, you go to two. And if that doesn't work, you go to three. And as far as I know, three was for me was going to be a hysterectomy.
Whoa.
And one didn't work. And so they basically like whatever two was, I think that there was a lot of cotton involved and just kind of trying to stop the bleeding and pressure. There was a balloon. They were able to stop the bleeding with this second solution. But with that, I did lose a lot of blood, and they thought that there was a possibility that I would need a blood transfusion. And so it just halted the elation of giving birth and the excitement of giving birth. And I was really uncomfortable. I really wanted a glass of water. They wouldn't let me have water because there was a possibility that I may still have a blood transfusion. If this didn't take, then I was potentially having a hysterectomy, and it was scary. This is June of 2021. And so we are not out of COVID yet. And so I was expected to wear a mask in the room. Couldn't have visitors. My son couldn't come and see me.
Oh,
And so I did feel a pressure to leave the hospital sooner than I probably would have. I think when I was in the hospital, when my son was born on a Wednesday, I don't think I went home until Saturday. My daughter was born, she also born on a Wednesday. And I left. I just know that I left like 2 days later and much earlier than I would have normally left. But, at the same time, I was anxious to get home to my son, and I wanted to be in the comfort of my own home, not necessarily in the hospital, but was not physically ready to leave the hospital
yeah.
necessarily. And, didn't have we had some things going on with our family where I didn't have the support system that I normally would have. And I remember a home nurse, they sent a visiting nurse, which was a nice thing to do to check up on me. And she was concerned. Like she could see that I was being too active. My son was not quite 3. So she could see that I was being too active. She could tell my blood pressure was higher than it should have been. And so I remember her being concerned, like, you've you've got to stop. Like you can't, like you should still be in the hospital, but because of COVID and because you said you could go home, like you're home, but you've got to act like you're still in the hospital and stay here. And I was just like, how? How do I do that? I
Yeah.
have like family visiting and my son and I have a new baby. Like, how?
Yeah.
So that was really hard. And I think it was a somewhat traumatic birth. I think even the most ideal births are still traumatic. The whole experience was difficult. And so just the recovery from that was physically difficult as well as emotionally and mentally. It's really hard to make that transition from being pregnant and carrying this baby inside you to holding the baby outside of you, especially if you just had surgery.
Do you think it took you longer to heal because you went home early?
I do.
Mm,
I also had a toddler at home.
yeah.
And so that made it more difficult to focus on just myself and the baby. So it was
Yeah.
myself and the baby my son. And so it was really hard. It's hard coming home with a new baby is so, so difficult. And this is a topic that this is not my specialty. So it's not a topic I can speak to with any kind of authority. But postnatal care is, I think, being talked about just certainly more right now in this country. But it's really unfortunate that brand new mothers don't get the care that they probably should. And so it's really difficult. It's really hard for anyone coming home with a new baby, regardless of the experience.
Sure. How did you choose to feed your baby?
I did what do they call it? A mix or I was able to nurse my daughter. I did supplement with formula, which I was prepared to do with my son. I just did not produce enough with breastfeeding. I didn't produce enough to satisfy him. And so I got comfortable reusing a combination of breast milk and formula really fast. And I was very comfortable doing that with my daughter. Our breastfeeding journey, my daughter and I was completely different than my son. It was easier. And so I nursed for a year while supplementing.
That's
But I
great.
remember with my son, I only nursed for about 5 months. And at that 5 months, we were both done. He was just like, I need a lot more than this. And like, if he found it frustrating and it was hard for me to see how frustrated he was. It was discouraging for me. And so it just wasn't, when we were done, I was happy to be done. And with my daughter, it was a grieving process when we were done. And so I found for me to be able to do a combo of breast milk and formula was really the best case scenario where I could have that bonding experience with her.
Uh-huh.
And also my husband could help with feeding. And so it
Yeah.
wasn't really an issue to women who are exclusively breastfeeding. It can be really difficult when you were the only person that can feed your baby. And so that was never the case with us, where this is still the same. She'll take food from just about anybody. So, but we'd had a really nice journey, my daughter and I, of breastfeeding. And I think I knew the last time that I nursed her that this was probably going to be it. And I took a picture. And so, she's just kind of like, she's not actively nursing. I think that like afterwards I like put her on my shoulder and I have that picture knowing that was it. And so they say that every mother-child combination is different. And so I feel very fortunate that I was able to experience it with both of my children and glad that I had the confidence to make it work in a way that it was going to work for everybody, where my
Uh-huh.
children were fed and they were happy and they were satisfied and I felt like I was still nourishing them. So I felt like it was a good system for us.
And mentally, how were you after giving birth?
I was lucky in terms of my mental health after birth, where the hormone journey that we go on through pregnancy and afterwards can be really difficult. And while I experienced that emotionally, I felt pretty stable and pretty like confident in how I was feeling. And there were things that would make me emotional. And I was tired because it's exhausting,
Yeah.
but I felt good. I always felt like very healthy in terms of my like physically, mentally, emotionally. I felt strong after giving birth. That being said, I think that later on, I started to struggle a little bit in terms of letting go of the whole, and I'm going to use the word journey again. I feel like I've used it 5 times in just the past 3 minutes, but letting go of my experience, where now that our family is complete and having the losses that we had and it's being kind of time to what's the next chapter of my life going to look like. I think I struggle a little bit looking back, especially on the more difficult times, like the pregnancy losses and the grief and having to make that choice to pursue donor conception. And I'm still working through a lot of that. So I think that while in what's considered kind of the traditional post-birth time was very healthy for me, it was kind of like afterwards when like the dust settled
Yeah,
that I continue to have to work on some of that.
sure.
Very lucky. I have a great support system and an incredible acupuncturist here in Boston who I work with on hormone balance because, gosh, I mean, my children are still really little, but now I'm managing hormones because I'm entering perimenopause. And so I went right from being pregnant to being premenopausal. And I have an incredible acupuncturist who's really helped me work on using some herbs that she's recommended and prescribed and doing in clinic acupuncture to balance my hormones. And that's really helped me in terms of my emotional health, my physical health, my relationships with my family, with my husband, as well as some of those side effects that we get with hormone imbalance, things like hot flashes and night sweats and insomnia and things like that. And so I'm very lucky that I have a really reliable and talented support team for things like that.
Well, what was your biggest challenge being pregnant over 40?
My, I think my biggest challenge was that the process to get pregnant over 40 was complicated and complex for me. And so it was a lot of emotional challenges. And I was very lucky physically. And like I talked about while I was pregnant, it was taking care of myself physically was really a priority. And so I felt strong physically and I felt strong mentally. It was just kind of managing that emotional health that was more of a challenge and a struggle.
Yeah. Is there anything you recommend that would help prepare someone for pregnancy and birth over 40?
Everybody needs something different. And so really toning in on and tuning into what it is that you need and if is something missing, how do you want to feel and how do you feel now and what's that gap? And then either working with doing some internal soul searching or working with a support person, a therapist, a coach, whomever, to identify like ways that you can fill that gap and prioritizing that rather than just saying, oh, this is just how I feel, or, well, pregnancy is hard at 40. There are so many solutions out there. And so advocating for yourself to figure out what those solutions are. And they do look different for everybody. And so what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. And so really believing that you can have a positive, joyful pregnancy experience, no matter how you got there, and identifying the ways to to make it joyful, to make it positive because I think we all deserve that, especially when you've had to work really hard to get pregnant. You deserve for it to be joyful. And so to believe that and to figure out what's going to work for you, what's going to be effective for you to make it a positive experience.
That's perfect. And what advice would you give yourself when you were pregnant if you could go back?
Advice I would give myself: drink more water, hydrate. Yes. Mhm.
Simple.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly can't think of anything more creative than that because that is the most important thing and something I still struggle with.
Yeah. We have some Instagram questions.
Okay.
But before we get to that, will you tell us about how you help women and how you came to being a fertility coach?
Yes. Well, after my son was born, I left my regular 9 to 5 job. It just didn't really work for me to commute and this was before everybody was working from home. And so to commute to a job and it was, to to leave him for that period of a big period, long period of time during the day, and plus a commute just didn't really make sense for me. It didn't make sense in terms of like what I wanted, and it didn't make sense financially for us to have full-time childcare for the role that I was in. And so I tried to work part-time, and it just wasn't working. And so I decided to leave that job, and I knew that I wanted to find something else where I could, something that was more flexible, where I could be home, and something that was more creative. And so I tried a handful of things. I love to write. And so I tried my hand at freelance writing, and really needed to work harder at making that work. But I did start to write about my story a lot. I was published on an online magazine in the fall of 2019, where I shared my story about how we opted to use an egg donor. It took a lot of courage to put that story out there, to have that published on the internet, where like people who didn't know that I chose donor conception were going to learn about it. And so I was really proud of myself that I had this piece published. It was the first time that, like, I think anything that I had written had been published anywhere besides a personal blog. And what then happened is I got emails and text messages from friends of friends, from people who had read my story, from people who, someone I knew from high school who was going through something
Wow.
similar. Now, the reason I wrote it in the first place was because I would have loved to have read this when I was going through it. When I was choosing donor egg, I would have loved to have read this success story. And so to be that person for someone was so rewarding. And so it became like a thing. Like people would text me, "Can I just run some stuff by you? Can I pick your brain?" And so it was incredibly rewarding for me. And then I started to think about like, maybe this is what I should be writing about instead. So I tried a little bit of that. But then I met someone who was going through something very similar and was going through some failed IVF cycles and was starting to pursue donor egg. And we worked really closely together and met on a regular basis. And she lived close to me, so we would go for walks and just talk about it. And she would just, after every time we would get together, she would say, "I feel so different after talking to you. Like, I just feel like a weight has been lifted. I feel so much more confident. It means so much to me. Like, this should probably be your job. You're really good at it." And I was like, I don't even know, like, is this a thing? And so that's how my services were born. I called it positive fertility because my goal was to make this process more joyful for women, a more positive experience. I know
Yeah.
that it can really be difficult. It can really, infertility and the treatments, they can just really be so hard. I do work with a lot of women who are over 35 and pursuing pregnancy either on their own and navigating IVF or donor conception. I've worked with a few women who are pursuing donor conception as well as with a sperm donor, a couple of women who are doing this on their own, which is so admirable. And, it's so exciting to see them become so strong and so confident in pursuing something like this. And just being someone that they can really connect to feel less alone and feel less isolated in this experience.
Are you helping them get pregnant like by techniques, or are you more on like the social, like mindset, emotional side?
I do a lot with mindset and emotion.
Okay.
I've really been able to come up with some incredible tools to help women who are struggling and who are struggling and having a negative experience.
Uh,
That being said, I have knowledge and experience about the logistics and the clinical side too. And so I am I'm able to support women in that way as well, to give advice and to, share my experience a lot and to talk to women about not just the mindset experience, but like advice on giving progesterone and oil shots
Yeah.
and how to combat side effects and how to prepare for a doctor's appointment. That is something that I do a lot, is help women get organized and prepare for, make sure that they can advocate for themselves and have these effective appointments. We have such little face time with our doctors, making sure that we're taking advantage of all of that time and that they're prepared for that.
Yeah.
And so it's, everyone needs something a little bit different. That's the beauty of private one-on-one coaching.
Yeah. I think that would have been nice. If I had to go through IVF again, I would love to have just someone hold my hand and just kind of walk me
Exactly.
through the process because
I had
it's
a
so
client say to me,
overwhelming.
is that a thing to like hire someone to just like be there for me? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
Would you like to give us your website and your Instagram handle?
Absolutely. So you can find my website at positivefertilitycoaching.com. And on there is all kinds of information about me as well as my blog. And on the website, you can also learn about how you can work with me. And then you can find me on Instagram at positive.fertility, where I post just about every day.
Okay, let me get really ready for this one. Okay, so our Instagram questions, full disclosure, some of them are actually my questions.
Okay.
The first question, it's not me, it says, was she told she had bad eggs or low ovarian reserves? And I think you answered that. You said you had
Yes.
low AMH.
Yep, my AMH levels were very low. My FSH, which reflects egg quality, so the quality of my eggs was actually pretty good for someone in their early 40s. And so, but my egg reserve was low. And so what I focused on in that beginning was I did do some work in terms of nutrition and supplements, the goal being the few eggs that I had left, making sure that they were as healthy as possible. So to give me a shot at using my own eggs during IVF. And that process does take a minimum of 3 months, because like you need a 3 month time period to cycle to get to improve the quality of the eggs that are in waiting. You can improve quality of the eggs. You cannot improve quantity. You cannot increase the number
Right.
of eggs that you have, but you can improve the quality of your eggs.
That's great. The next question is how to not worry about what others think about pregnancy at 46.
That's really hard. It's really hard. You can hear all of the advice and all of the positive statements all you want, but it is really difficult to not care what people think,
Yeah.
in my opinion. It's just human nature to want that approval of other people. And social media makes that even more difficult when we are literally asking for likes. But I think that instead of thinking, I'm not going to worry about what other people think, it's focusing on what you think and how do you feel about your pregnancy? And do you feel like you are doing everything to feel good about your pregnancy? And if you are showing confidence and showing that it comes from inside you, and so if you're feeling confident, if you're feeling good about your pregnancy, then other people are too. And honestly, don't overestimate how many people are thinking about your pregnancy.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Now it's my questions. What did you wish you knew before using donor eggs?
I wish that I appreciated how connected I would still feel to my children. Genetics, my children's genetics are really important. It makes them who they are. But what also makes them who they are is my efforts in raising them. And I believe that my best qualities are that I am a kind person, I'm an empathetic person, I'm a patient person, compassionate. I like to believe that I'm funny. And I pass those things on to my kids every single day the way that I'm raising them. That's my contribution to who they are. And it holds a lot of weight. The fact that I have blue eyes and they have brown, my son has the coolest dark brown eyes, and his compared to his fair complexion and his light brown hair. And it's just like, I wouldn't choose different eyes for him. And my daughter has these really pretty light brown eyes, and they're like these like big almond shaped eyes. And she's stunning. I think my children are the most beautiful creatures on this earth. I wouldn't choose to change anything about what they look like. Also, my son seems to be really good at math. He's in kindergarten. And so that he seems to be like really catching on to be able to understand the concept of math. And that is not something I would have been able to offer him. So just being confident that even though they don't share my genetics, I'm sharing so much with them, and they are still gaining so much from my role in their life, which is a mother's role in a child's life is significant. And so just because we don't share DNA doesn't change that.
Exactly. To preface this question, a lot of our listeners are trying to conceive. So, what are your three best tips for women trying to conceive over 40?
My three best tips for women trying to conceive over 40 is one, if you have not done your like baseline blood work, to do that and to see a doctor. You need to know what you're dealing with. And this is not like go do IVF. This is you need to know what you're up against. And so if
Sure.
you are, even if you're planning to just try naturally and just not necessarily use medical intervention, you still need to know, like, do you have a hormone imbalance that needs to be addressed? Do you have an egg quality issue that you need to focus on? And if you are focused on egg quality, then I think the book It Starts with the Egg is a really, really good resource. It's a good resource. You do not need to follow every single bit of the book. You'll make yourself crazy. Because that's good. That leads to my next point, is that you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to do all of the things. You need to find the right balance for you so you feel good about this journey for yourself. And so I do think it's important that you eat fertility supportive foods, but I would never tell anyone to go on a diet if they were trying to get pregnant. I think it's more about adding food, protein rich foods, eggs, salmon, lean proteins, things like that. I think they're great. There's so many great resources out there. So like adding those fertility friendly foods so your body feels nourished and hydrating. You gotta hydrate. I'm sorry. That's the answer to almost everything. And then my third piece is prioritizing self-care. And so getting rest, finding ways that this process can be really stressful. And so finding ways to manage that stress the best way, the way that's most effective for you. And so if that means a daily walk, if that means doing yoga every day, if that means getting 8 hours of sleep, if that means when you're feeling really stressed out and that you are completely flooded with getting pregnant, figuring out how to turn that off in your brain. And for me, that was reading. Like if I picked up a book that I liked, it was the only time I could ever turn my brain off from thinking about getting pregnant. So like, what's that answer for you in prioritizing that?
Mm,
And I'm going to throw a fourth in. I'm a big believer in acupuncture for
yes,
fertility health.
I
So
love it. It feels so
yeah,
good. If
yeah,
nothing else, you'll be relaxed at the end of it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what thoughts helped you through your journey?
Changed through my journey, but mostly it was working on my self-confidence and feeling strong, feeling physically strong, feeling mentally strong, feeling emotionally strong. And what did I need to do that? To feel physically strong, I needed to move. I did, like I said, I did a lot of yoga, and that
Yeah.
helped me feel physically strong and physically healthy. For mental and emotional strength, I focused a lot on connection. So that was talking to other women who had either struggled with a similar experience or were struggling with that. And so I didn't feel so alone. I didn't know that a fertility coach was a thing back when I was but I think that I could have definitely benefited from just talking to somebody who experienced that. I had a lot of friends that had done IVF with success, but only knew one person who had pursued donor conception, and I didn't, she was a friend of a friend. And so that was really helpful to me. But finding other people that had success stories that looked similar to mine to give me hope,
Mhm.
that really helped with my emotional health.
That's perfect. Now, you kind of already answered my last question. What was the transition like from trying to conceive to pregnancy mentally?
It was different with both pregnancies. And because with my son, it was IVF with my own eggs was unsuccessful, but donor eggs, when we did donor egg cycle, it was very successful. And so that transition was just like, okay, we found our path and this worked, and now we're going to have a baby. And then with my daughter, it was a little bit different because even I had felt that we had paid our dues. We had literally paid all the dues. And I couldn't believe it when when we were experiencing these losses. And all three of my pregnancy losses were very different. The first one was my natural pregnancy. It was, you know, not surprising that I was not able to, that I was able to get pregnant. It was surprising that I was able to get pregnant, but it was not surprising that that pregnancy didn't stick. The second, we know that that pregnancy was a chromosome abnormality. And chances are that the embryos in the third pregnancy loss was also a chromosome abnormality. So you really can't predict what the outcome is going to be. And so the transition from trying to get pregnant with our second to actual pregnancy was really hard to feel confident in the pregnancy. And that took a lot of work on my part, a lot of patience, and again, reaching out to support, not being afraid to ask for what I needed to advocate for myself. Once I found the courage to do that, it really did turn things around.
Love it. And my real last question
Mm.
is what advice would you have for women over 40 that are trying to conceive right now?
The data is there that it's potentially going to be more challenging, but science is on your side. And we have so much more information than we did when even just several years ago. And so if this is what you want, you can have this. It might not look like your plan A. It might not be this straight path that you had intended. But if you want to have a baby, you can have a baby. You can make that happen. You have to be open to possibilities. You have to be prepared for things being a little bit more difficult, but it can happen for you.
Love it. Laura, I feel like your whole story was just for me today because it's so
Oh,
much of what I needed to hear. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. And
this has been awesome. It's been so fun to talk to you.